Kwe, good afternoon et bonjour. Je tiens à reconnaître que je me trouve présentement sur le territoire traditionnel du peuple algonquin. Merci à tous de vous joindre à nous. Avec moi aujourd'hui sont mes collègues et ministres Anita Anand, Diane Lebouthillier, Omar Alghabra et Joyce Murray. Nous répondrons au rapport d'audit de performance de la vérificatrice générale déposé plus tôt en Chambre des communes aujourd'hui. Je débuterai par répondre au rapport sur l'accès à une eau potable solide dans les collectivités des Premières Nations. Nous accueillons favorablement, bien évidemment, les recommandations du rapport de la vérificatrice. Permettez-moi de vous assurer que nous partageons leur engagement et nous continuerons de travailler sans relâche jusqu'à ce que tous les avis à long terme dans les Premières Nations sur réserve soient levés. Since 2015, we've worked in partnership with First Nations leadership and communities to improve access to clean drinking water. Despite the challenges, we're confident that we're on the right path. Let's consider the progress that's been made in the last few years. In November 2015, when we came into power, there were 105 long-term drinking water advisories on public systems on reserves across the country in effect. To date, 99 have been lifted. Each community has its own set of challenges, and from the beginning, we've worked directly with community leaders to identify and formulate the best path forward in each case. During Budget 2016, we allocated $1.8 billion to improve First Nations access to clean water. Between November 2015 and February 2018, over 50 long-term water advisories were lifted on public water systems. Budget 2018 provided an additional $172.6 million over 3 years to help with this work. During the fall economic statement of last fall, we announced an additional $1.5 billion to accelerate the work to lift all long-term drinking water advisories on reserve, bringing the total investments to over $3.5 billion since 2016. Part of this money will also provide reliable and lasting funding to help prevent future long-term drinking water advisories by making it easier for problems to be caught early on. Long-term funding will cover 100% of operations and maintenance costs for water and wastewater infrastructure on reserves based on the funding formula, an area that will improve sustainability of the systems, improve water operator salaries, and improve operator supports, and transform the way in which we approach water in First Nations. That brings us to today. We're one shy of celebrating the 100th long-term drinking water advisory lift. Additionally, together we've been able to prevent over 175 short-term water advisories from becoming long-term issues. We can't deny the loss of a construction season due to COVID. However, I can confirm that there are project plans in place and underway to resolve all 57 remaining advisories, which affect 39 communities. Nous devons continuer de répondre aux besoins et priorités des communautés sur le long terme et de le faire au-delà de 2021 dans les années à suivre. Nous vous voulons tous être fiers du travail accompli par les communautés des Premières Nations et nous sommes déterminés à continuer d'améliorer l'accès à l'eau potable à long terme. Merci, miigwech, and thank you.
Thank you, Minister Anand.
Merci beaucoup. Good afternoon, everyone. Bienvenue tout le monde. I would like to begin by thanking the Auditor General and her office for this important and timely report. The National Shipbuilding Strategy is Canada's long-term plan to renew the fleets of the Royal Canadian Navy and the Canadian Coast Guard. The NSS strives to deliver vessels to the RCN and the CCG in a timely and affordable manner to create sustainable marine industry and generate economic growth for Canada. As the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, I and my department are responsible for the overall program management of the National Shipbuilding Strategy. And we welcome the Auditor General's findings and accept all of her recommendations. La vérificatrice générale fait remarquer que la construction navale est complexe et que, durant la période visée par la vérification, le gouvernement a pris d'importantes décisions pour placer la stratégie nationale de construction navale sur une voie viable. The strategy is a long-term plan to renew our federal fleets, and we are seeing results. In July 2020, Irving Shipbuilding delivered the first of 6 new Arctic and offshore patrol ships to the Royal Canadian Navy, making it the first large ship to be built for the Navy under the NSS. In October 2020, Seaspan Vancouver Shipyards delivered the third and final offshore fisheries science vessel, the Canadian Coast Guard ship called the John Cabot, marking the delivery of the first full class of large vessels built under the NSS. Chantier Davy a achevé récemment la conversion du deuxième brise-glace provisoire moyen, le NGCC Jean Goodwill, et l'a livré à la garde côtière canadienne. These are only some of the recent accomplishments of the NSS. Work is underway across the country, and National Shipbuilding Strategy contracts have contributed an estimated $20 billion to the Canadian economy and supported nearly 17,000 jobs. We have made much progress, but the program has not been without its challenges. In the early days, plans and projections were not yet informed by actual build experience at the shipyards, and expertise in Canada was still developing. Entirely new classes of ships were built by new workforces and new shipyards. Mais au fil de l'évolution de la stratégie nationale de construction navale, les chantiers navals et le Canada ont acquis l'expérience. Aujourd'hui, nous avons une bien meilleure compréhension, fondée sur des données probantes, du temps, des efforts et des dépenses qu'implique la construction de navires de calibre mondial. We appreciate the OAG report and agree that having complete and reliable schedules is essential for decision making. We also agree that improving risk management tools is essential. And we continue to work with our partners to closely manage the shipbuilding process and to strengthen the overall strategy. For example, we are applying the lessons learned from the original shipyard selection to the process to select a third shipyard. In short, we thank the Auditor General for her recommendations. We are committed to addressing them so that the strategy continues to deliver important benefits for Canadians. Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Megwaj.
Merci beaucoup. Ministre Lebouthillier, la parole est à vous.
Merci. Bonjour. Hello, everyone. L'allocation canadienne pour enfants, soit l'ACE, est une prestation mensuelle non imposable versée aux familles admissibles pour aider à subvenir aux besoins de leurs enfants de moins de 18 ans. Cette prestation vient en aide à plus de 3,3 millions de familles canadiennes chaque année. Dans son rapport, le Bureau du vérificateur général du Canada reconnaît que l'Agence a su gérer efficacement le programme de l'ACE, en plus de veiller à ce que les paiements exacts et opportuns soient versés à ces millions de familles admissibles. Bien que les constatations de la vérification soient généralement positives, le rapport a cerné 2 possibilités d'amélioration. Premièrement, le rapport a recommandé d'améliorer les documents à la disposition des demandeurs et les données recueillies par ceux-ci. Et deuxièmement, il a recommandé d'aider à clarifier la confusion au sujet du concept de présomption en faveur du parent de sexe féminin, une identification juridique pour la garde d'un enfant en vertu de la loi de l'impôt sur le revenu. L'Agence a accepté les recommandations, lesquelles cadrent avec notre philosophie « Les gens d'abord ». Cette philosophie nous motive à écouter les Canadiens, à changer notre façon de travailler et à améliorer nos services en fonction de leur rétroaction. Cela nous motive également à mettre en place des mesures visant à améliorer l'administration du programme de l'ACE, y compris l'amélioration des messages sur notre site Web et dans nos guides et formulaires, ainsi qu'à offrir plus de formation à ceux qui évaluent les demandes. Par ailleurs, je peux vous assurer que l'Agence demeure déterminée à protéger et à assurer l'équité et l'intégrité du régime fiscal du Canada pour tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes. Et les particuliers peuvent être assurés que l'Agence continue d'examiner les procédures et les outils de communication pour aider tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes admissibles à comprendre les étapes à suivre pour demander et recevoir l'allocation canadienne pour enfants. Merci beaucoup. Bon après-midi.
Merci beaucoup. Now, Minister Alghabra, when you're ready.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour. As Minister of Transport, the safety and security of passengers and of the rail transportation system remains my top priority. I'm pleased today to welcome the Auditor General's follow-up audit of Transport Canada's oversight of rail safety. This report focuses on select elements of the Auditor General's 2013 audit. Since the 2013 audit, Transport Canada has taken action to apply all of the report's recommendations to strengthen oversight and improve compliance and enforcement activity. Transport Canada monitors federal railway companies for compliance with rules, regulations, and standards under the Railway Safety Act. We do this by auditing risks and conducting safety inspections. On average, we conduct more than 35,000 yearly inspections and audits on grade crossings, railway tracks, equipment, and operations. In addition, in the last year alone, we have put in place several measures, including regulations requiring rail operators to install video and voice recorders in locomotives, approving new rules to better manage rail worker fatigue, and ordering the industry to improve employees' safety in yard operations. We have also instructed the rail industry to improve how they maintain and inspect their tracks and have placed speed restrictions on trains carrying large amount of dangerous goods. Transport Canada acknowledges the findings of this report, and we are committed to the continuous improvement of our rail safety program. We are already working to address all of the Auditor General's recommendations to further improve the effectiveness of our safety oversight. Among other measures, we will launch consultations on strengthening safety management systems. We will also be looking for ways to better measure and improve our oversight program. Canada's railway network is the longest in the world and the fifth busiest when it comes to volume of goods. It's equally important to note that Canada's rail transportation system is one of the safest in the world. This is a result of shared efforts between our government and partners, including other levels of government, railway companies, communities, and industry partners. I want to assure you that rail safety is my top priority, and my department is continuously looking for ways to make our railway system even safer for Canadians. I'm grateful for the Auditor General's report and confident that it will help guide our ongoing efforts. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Minister Murray.
Hello, thank you for joining us here today, and I'm pleased to respond to the report on procuring complex IT solutions. First, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from my home in Vancouver on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. As Minister of Digital Government, I'm leading a generational investment to update and replace outdated government IT systems and to modernize how the government delivers services to all Canadians. Lorsqu'il s'agit de l'approvisionnement en technologie de l'information pour le gouvernement du Canada, nous nous engageons à adopter les pratiques d'approvisionnement ouvertes, équitables et concurrentielles et à tirer les leçons des erreurs du passé. A critical component of modernizing our IT is to work in new ways and build these systems with modern, agile procurement principles. And I'd like to thank the Auditor General for her report and for her acknowledgement that we've already made progress in this area. we know that we have more to do. We agree with and accept her recommendations. They will further support our efforts to bring increased governance and fairness to our procurement processes and to make them even more open and transparent. And I aim to keep honestly assessing whether our processes are working. Le Secrétariat du Conseil de Trésor, Service public et Approvisionnement Canada et Services partagés ont travaillé en étroite collaboration pour favoriser une prise de conscience commune de l'approvisionnement agile, notamment en ce qui concerne la mise en œuvre d'initiatives de transformation et des technologies de l'information. Shared services and PSPC have already created centers of expertise and agile procurement to develop guidance and support for procurement officers. This is a first step that we will build on as we implement the advice from this report. In following the Auditor General's recommendation, the Government of Canada will also develop more comprehensive guidance and training for employees to improve understanding of agile procurement and how to work in the open and collaboratively. We will implement more effective processes to ensure that stakeholder organizations are properly consulted on complex IT procurements, and will openly engage with vendors and other organizations to hear any concerns they may have and improve our information management practices to ensure more fairness and transparency. Although agile procurement is still a relatively new approach in government, I'm confident in our ability to take full advantage of this approach. Il me fera maintenant plaisir de répondre à vos questions en mon nom et au nom de mes collègues dont les services sont mentionnés dans ce rapport. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Murray. We'll now take questions from journalists. One question, one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant répondre aux questions des journalistes. Une question et une question de suivi. Opérateur, première question, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Merci. If you have a question, please press star 1 on your device's keypad. Si vous désirez poser une question, veuillez s'il vous plaît appuyer sur les touches étoile 1 de votre appareil. You may cancel your question at any time by pressing star 2. Vous pouvez à tout moment annuler votre question en appuyant sur les touches étoile 2. The first question is from, la première question est de Dylan Robertson from Winnipeg Free Press. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Hi, Minister Miller. Manitoba Chiefs today are calling for an inquiry in the scrapping of the value for money part of the tendering protocol that ISC uses for capital projects. They say that ISC has compelled them to go with the cheapest contractors, which often ends up being costlier in the long run when issues emerge. I'm wondering if you're looking at suspending this part of the procurement protocol.
Well, thank you for the question, Dylan. And first, there's been a bit of a conflated proposition with the contention that this is about the lowest bidder. There is a value for money proposition in any procurement process that follows best industry practices, but this isn't about going with the cheap option. It's going with the option that suits the First Nations. And over the course of my tenure as minister for the last 15 months, my team and I have been looking into what are those practices? What is the tendering practice? This is open on our website for everyone to consult. But people shouldn't think that we necessarily, or First Nations necessarily, have to go with the lowest bidder. Certainly, over the last little while, I will concede that I've heard some alarming stories. For example, as everyone heard, in and around Niskandiga, and I'm very much open to re-examining not only the policy, but how it's put in effect in regions and through the department. This is a little more complex than simply rolling it up into saying we go with the lowest bidder. Sometimes, because of infrastructure pressure, we're faced with only one tender, and it's something we have to look at. But it's always done in partnership with First Nations, in addition to the priorities that they are identifying to me. I haven't heard that directly from them yet, so I will wait to see and get it from them. But absolutely, we're willing to work with them.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask how much faith you have in your department's categorization of long-term advisories. The auditors today found the community had 31 separate short-term advisories over the course of 5 years, but it never registered as being a long-term advisory, so it wasn't prioritized for fixing. The government's promises hinges on these long-term advisories, but it seems like the goalposts don't necessarily reflect the situation on the ground. I'm wondering if you're going to ask the department to change its definition of long-term advisories or reassess if communities should be under that label.
How we categorize long-term water advisories and lifts as well varies a little bit from how the Auditor General does it. And you can look into decommissioning as well as part of that. We currently, as the data point, have 39 communities representing a little over 57 water advisories that are on a long-term status. We're looking to lift a number of those. At the end of the day, what we want to see is clean water going into communities, however that's categorized, and that's the goal of this department. So always willing to perfect things and align with how the Auditor General categorizes things. But certainly I'm glad to look into something like that.
Thanks, Dylan. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from La prochaine question est de Libertium de Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Vous la parole.
Yes, thank you. Wanted to ask Minister Anand about the shipbuilding strategy. The last few weeks we've seen a variety of different reports on this strategy. We've seen $1 billion that the government's going to pay for the offshore oceanographic science vessel. We've got the PBO report, another $17 billion for the CSC. We've got delays. We've got all kinds of problems. How can Canadians have any confidence in this strategy? And how can you reassure them that you are getting the strategy on track as we continue to see more cost overruns and endless delays?
Okay, thank you so much, Lee, for the question. I'm sorry we can't have this conversation in person, but I wanted.
Minister Anand, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Oh, je m'excuse. I want to take you back to 2012 and the origins of the shipbuilding strategy that was put in place by the government of the day. And the idea was, and continues to be, that it is a long-term strategy to renew the fleets of the RCN and the CCG. And the primary purpose, as I'm sure you know, is to ensure that these vessels are delivered in a timely and affordable manner while creating, a sustainable marine industry and generating economic growth for Canada. So on that score, in terms of generating economic growth, with the 17,000 jobs that have been created under the NSS, with the addition of $20 billion to the Canadian economy, the NSS has shown some success. At the same time, it is clear that there are lessons to be learned, and that over time, this very complex process of shipbuilding, which clearly needs to improve, as the Auditor General herself says, is and warrants some improvement. And that is what we are taking from the Auditor General's report today. There are areas of improvement: risk management strategies, delivery schedules, for example. But by the same token, some of the advantages of this strategy are clear and present, and we need to continue to improve it. Thank you.
With a follow-up, how much of a mistake was it to try to accomplish three objectives with this strategy? Renewing the fleet, creating a sustainable marine industry, which this report seems to suggest C-SPAN almost went under, and economic benefits. How much of those three competing priorities have contributed to the many problems that we're seeing with this plan right now?
Well, I want to be clear that I am of the view that the shipbuilding strategy has been by and large successful and that improvements in the strategy continue to need to be made. I also want to emphasize how complex and challenging the strategy is, and we will continue to work to improve that strategy on the ground. I don't think that it is a mistake when you see the contributions to the Canadian economy, the $20 billion to the economy, the 17,000 jobs to the economy, and the actual vessels that have been produced. Since the launch of the strategy itself, 4 large ships have been delivered and several small vessels are being built. In addition, the number of repair, refit, and maintenance projects that are underway across the country continues to increase. We are in the process of reviewing the Davie Shipyard as the third potential shipyard in this strategy, and we are going to continue to work closely with the shipyard partners to deliver ships as soon as possible in a way that benefits all Canadians, including the Canadian economy and the Coast Guard as well as the Navy. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from, la prochaine question est de Alexis Riopel de Le Devoir. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour. La question est pour le ministre Miller. L'engagement du gouvernement à résoudre les problèmes d'eau potable dans les communautés autochtones date de 2015. Dans le rapport de la vérificatrice générale d'aujourd'hui, il dit que le gouvernement devait s'atteler en priorité à changer la formule d'allocation des fonds pour le financement du fonctionnement et de l'entretien des systèmes. Je me demandais pourquoi ça n'avait pas été fait avant, pourquoi ça n'avait pas été prévu dans les dernières années et déjà mis en place à l'heure actuelle.
Eh bien, merci pour la question fort pertinente. Écoutez, depuis 2015, on s'est fixé, comme vous l'avez dit, l'objectif de lever dans le temps les 105 avis qui étaient présents et l'emphase était mise sur l'infrastructure et d'avoir un engagement approprié avec les communautés pour s'assurer que ces communautés puissent lever leurs avis d'ébullition à long terme. Quand j'ai pris mes fonctions, quand je suis entré en fonction en novembre 2019, il y a donc 15 mois, je me suis rassemblé avec l'équipe bien avant la COVID pour dire est-ce qu'on fait les choses de la bonne façon? Oui, c'est très important, c'est un droit le plus fondamental d'avoir un accès public sur réserve à de l'eau potable sûre et fraîche pour les résidents. Mais est-ce que l'approche se fait de la bonne façon? Alors, ce qu'on a pu voir au cours de ces mois où, évidemment, la COVID a explosé, c'est qu'il y avait des demandes, des revendications fort pertinentes en ce qui a trait, à l'entretien d'une infrastructure clé d'une communauté, c'est-à-dire les usines en eau potable, l'approvisionnement dans les résidences de cette même eau. Et des vrais challenges en ce qui a trait à la formule qui était proposée. Et pour rappeler à ceux qui sont peut-être plus intéressés, c'est que le gouvernement fédéral donnait 80% du financement de l'entretien et la communauté elle-même devait donner 20%. Alors, les fonds n'étaient pas nécessairement à l'appui et ce à quoi on assistait, c'était le risque que pouvait poser toute cette dynamique le risque d'avoir un avis d'ébullition à court terme et ensuite à long terme. Alors, ce qu'on a fait, et c'est reflété dans l'énoncé fiscal d'automne, c'est qu'on a annoncé 1,5 milliard de dollars pour toutes les communautés avec des approvisionnements publics sur réserve pour régler le problème, c'est-à-dire d'aller à 100%. Et en termes de chiffres, ce que ça fait à comparer avec le financement qui se faisait, par exemple, en 2015-2016, ça va être de doubler cet argent-là pour les communautés pour assurer la pérennité de l'infrastructure. La vérificatrice générale a souligné, et évidemment avec cause, qu'il y avait un certain nombre d'avis d'ébullition à long terme qui restait à lever, qui allait au-delà de 10 ans. Eh bien, à peu près la moitié de ces avis ont de l'eau sûre et propre qui fonctionne maintenant grâce à l'investissement de notre gouvernement. Mais ce qui manque, c'est l'assurance du gouvernement fédéral, le partenariat du gouvernement fédéral quant à cet investissement dans le maintien de l'opération de l'actif, c'est-à-dire l'usine en tant que telle et le personnel. Et là, grâce à l'énoncé fiscal d'automne, on est là pour appuyer les communautés et ça à long terme. Alors, je l'ai souligné dans mes propos en introduction, mais cet argent-là de 1,5 milliard de dollars va transformer la façon dont on approche les communautés et notre engagement, c'est-à-dire le soutien du gouvernement fédéral à cet effet-là. Donc, ça va avoir pour effet de vraiment transformer la donne et d'avoir une approche d'ensemble quant à notre objectif de lever ces avis.
Parfait. En suivi, il y a non seulement la question du 80%, mais aussi la manière, la formule qui permet de déterminer quels sont les coûts de fonctionnement et d'entretien. C'est une formule qui date des années 80, comme le souligne la vérificatrice générale. Est-ce que vous avez une date ou un échéancier clair pour que les communautés sachent à quel moment une nouvelle formule peut-être plus adéquate va entrer en vigueur?
Il va y avoir des nouvelles à suivre. Je vais devoir faire le suivi avec vous et ce sera peut-être l'objet d'un brefage technique parce que c'est très important comme concept. En termes de soutien fiscal, je vous ai dit que dans l'année fiscale 2020-2021, ça va représenter le double, mais là, rendu en 2024, 2025, ça va être à peu près 4 fois. Donc, c'est tout un appui qui va être porté aux communautés de façon récurrente pour leur accompagner dans le processus. Mais je suis évidemment très ouvert à réexaminer la formule parce que, évidemment, ça a été souligné hier en point de presse, une personne qui travaille, une personne très expérimentée, qui fait la fierté de sa communauté, qui travaille dans sa communauté, peut en faire bien plus en dehors de la communauté. Et en dehors de la communauté, on s'entend que c'est des communautés très souvent non autochtones, alors c'est pas juste.
Merci, Alexis. Prochaine question, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from. La prochaine question est de Brett Forrester de APTN News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hi, my question is for Minister Miller as well. The Auditor General says First Nations will not have reliable clean water access until several things happen: policy reform, updated 30-year-old funding formulas, new federal legislation, and concrete long-term solutions. So my question is, when will Ottawa accomplish all these things?
Well, thank you, Brett. I think what we need to distinguish is the situation we found ourselves in 2015 with a massive undercapitalization in infrastructure and critical infrastructure in Indigenous communities, and the situation we find ourselves now, which admittedly is not perfect. What we've seen is close to 100 lifting of long-term water advisories due to the persistent engagement that we've had with communities that now have, and some it's been an issue of 18, 20 years that they haven't had it. They do have clean water. The issues you raise are very important because that's something that I and my team heard repeatedly throughout the 15 months that I've been Minister of Indigenous Services. Is they want us in there for the long run. And the question I kept hearing is, where are you going to be after March 2021? Are you just going to go away and these things will slip to long term, rather they're short term and then to long term? And the work that we did throughout the fall to identify where we need to change things fell squarely in that discussion around O&M, which I get makes a lot of people's eyes glaze over, but that we're talking about fairness to water operators on reserve that could get more off reserve in a non-Indigenous community. We're talking about training of the best and brightest to work in state-of-the-art plants. We're talking about a formula, like you said, it was outdated. The federal government was only providing 80% of the funding, leaving the 20% up to the community. Not all communities can do that. So we're moving to 100%. And as I told your colleague in French, the funding that we announced in the fall economic statement of $1.5 billion works on some of the acceleration measures that we need to do throughout COVID, because we have in fact lost the construction season. But I believe most importantly, really transforms the way we approach providing clean water into Indigenous communities. And that is namely in the area of operations and maintenance, which will double the amounts that we had going into communities in 2015, 2016, in 2020, 2021. So right now, and then by 2024, 2025, will be close to 4 times what we had going into communities. So that will transform the relationship, will allow for repairs, maintenance, operations of key assets within communities. And we know that premature aging occurs when you can't operate the asset. It's great to have a state-of-the-art treatment plant in a community that is the pride of the community, but you have to have people that operate in it, are trained, and can get proper pay for equal work, and that's just a matter of fairness. And so the conclusion of the Auditor General is a very pertinent one. It's one that I and my team saw going into the pandemic, where I do have some work to do and some thinking to wrap, I think, our collective brains around is legislative framework. You'll recall, because you've covered these issues, that the current federal framework was one that was put in by the Conservative government. It was widely decried by First Nations. It's been called the Harper Hangover. It is called a colonialist instrument. So I would say that we need to rethink the framework with which we approach safe water and clean water on reserve to one that really reflects our relationship of nation to nation. So that will take some engagement and some thinking. And certainly, as we know, that Ottawa imposed solutions do not work. And that's one point in the Auditor General's report that I want to do some further thinking on.
Brett, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you for that fulsome answer. You know, in your introduction, you said, despite the challenges, we're confident we're on the right path. But to me, the audit is saying that Canada needs to immediately do several things and reform several things that haven't been done. As noted, the auditor is calling for a new regulatory regime to be put in place, and that hasn't been done in 15 years, despite several audits. So I suppose I would just repose the question that when is a reasonable timeline for these reforms to be accomplished?
Well, like I said at the end of the previous question that I answered, Brett, we really want to examine with First Nations what that approach is. We have within Indigenous Services Canada a pretty robust monitoring system and engagement system with First Nations that allows the type of feedback to track waterborne illness, to engage. It's a number of close to 100 dedicated operators across the country that work with First Nations to get data to have constant monitoring and feedback and engagement. What we've seen throughout the pandemic is when we do engage and when we have proper engagement with communities, there are better outcomes. And I think that it would be true with water as well. So whether that is embodied through an enhanced legislative framework from Ottawa, or one that is co-developed and worked with through First Nations, and including the same process on a number of subjects that we've engaged on, self-determination, water authorities that can work faster or on the ground or First Nations led. Those are things that I want to examine. I have a very, very specific goal of ensuring that clean water gets in communities. We have to make sure that it's being done in the right way. And I would put to you that we are close to getting there. We are on a good track, but it is part of the overall approach of ensuring that First Nations have access to safe water.
Thanks, Brett. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from La prochaine question est de Ryan Jones from CBC News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hi there. My question is also for Minister Miller, a bit of a follow-up. So as the previous reporter mentioned, one of the issues that the AG identified was the lack of a regulatory regime. So I guess my question is, how is that acceptable, and what are the plans, if any, to set one up to ensure that the rights of First Nations people to clean drinking water are enshrined in law?
Our first priority is to ensure that First Nations have access to clean and safe drinking water. How we do that and how we embody that and capture that as part of a federal commitment is equally important. We know that the previous regime didn't work, was widely decried. We're currently working with the Assembly of First Nations specifically on how that framework would look like. But it is something that they'll have to be a little wider than AFN. And working with regional water authorities this summer, for example, I would note that a regional water authority was launched, First Nations led, in the Atlantic regions, and we're willing to sponsor and participate in many more. We know that First Nations-led solutions lead to better outcomes. It isn't simply a matter of policy that just leads to better outcomes. And so that's something and a path that we want to walk with First Nations. I can't provide you with a timeline. It wouldn't be right. It wouldn't reflect the work that needs to be done and the engagement that I have to hear back from communities that are affected.
Ryan, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I think I'll switch over to Minister Alghabra. You did mention that Transport Canada has begun to, or has addressed many of the recommendations in the previous 2013 audit, but I mean, clearly there's much more progress that needs to be done according to the Auditor General, So I guess just my question, why after so many years is there still so much to do on rail safety?
Thank you, Ryan. Look, as I said earlier, safety for rail passengers and rail traffic is my number one priority. And the Auditor General acknowledges in the report that important and significant progress has been made since the 2013 audit. We've increased the number of inspectors by 50%. We've increased the number of inspections to an average 35,000 a year. We've changed the type of inspection from random to risk-based analysis. We've added extra regulations where we require companies to install voice and video recorders. We've added, introduced measures for fatigue management. We've added measures to improve employee safety in yard operations. We've added restrictions on speed for trains that are carrying dangerous goods. So, but undoubtedly, safety is a continuous improvement project. I welcome the Auditor General's report where she's asking us to go further, and I and the department are committed to implementing those recommendations.
Thank you, Ryan. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. Once again, please press star 1 if you have a question. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à appuyer sur étoile 1 pour toute question. The next question is from, la prochaine question est de Lina Dib de la Presse canadienne. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Yes, Minister Alghabra, I want to go on with that topic you just touched. So, I mean, the minister before you kept saying to us the same thing, safety, the rail safety is my number one priority. And still, the Lac Mégantic tragedy that was in 2013, and still the AG today is saying you're not doing enough. And actually she's saying that you've done a lot of things. There's a lot of movement, but you have no way of assessing if all these things you're doing are actually having an impact on safety. So what is your answer to that criticism from the AG?
Thank you for the question. And let me, since you raised Lac Mégantic, I join all Canadians in remembering and honoring those who've been affected by this. On first week of my job, my predecessor, Minister Garneau, had left me a spike from the track of Lac Mégantic to remind me of the responsibility that rests upon my shoulders and the department for safety consideration. Look, what the Auditor General is asking us to add extra layers of safety auditing, and we welcome that. We actually looked at other jurisdictions in the world that are doing what she's asking for, and we couldn't find an example. But having said that, we think it's a good idea, and we think we have started working already on reaching out to our stakeholders, to our partners, to implement these recommendations.
So what exactly do you mean that you looked elsewhere and nobody is doing this? Like no other country does actually have a way of assessing if their safety measures are having an impact?
Yeah, so this is an added layer on top of all the inspections and audits and system management and safety system managements that are audited, is a way for us to go back and measure the actual impact. So the way we've been measuring safety is through traditional measurements of accidents every year per capita or per passengers or per cargo. What is being suggested is, can we measure other type of systemic ways where these new systems that we've implemented is actually adding a significant impact? And based on that, we've looked at other jurisdictions, and we haven't been able to find one yet. But having said that, I'm not saying that it's a bad idea. I think it's actually a good idea. And there's nothing stopping us from being the first in the world to do that, and we are committed to doing it.
Thank you, Lena. This concludes today's press conference. Ceci conclut la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui. Merci.